special sonar devices sent by the U.S. military scour the Java Sea for the lost AirAsia plane. 2014 sees progress in combating some viruses and a major setback for global health. And a notorious Real Housewife kicks off the new year behind bars. Africa 54 starts right now.
Hello and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. We'll have those stories in a moment, but we begin with international intrigue surrounding last month's failed coup of the Gambian president. Two men are being detained by U.S. authorities for their alleged part in a plot to overthrow Gambian President Yahya Jammeh. On December the 30th, the U.S. Justice Department says Papa Fall, who holds a dual citizenship, and Chernon Jie were arrested in the United States upon their return from the Gambia. The two are charged with conspiring to violate the U.S. Neutrality Act, which prohibits American citizens or residents from taking up arms or plotting against a nation at peace with America. Well, for more insight on this situation, we're joined live via phone from Georgia by Tamsir Jassy of the Gambian Association for Peace and Reconciliation. He was a former Deputy Inspector General of Police and Director General of Immigration for the Republic of Gambia. Welcome to Africa 54, Mr. Jassy.
Thank you.
Yeah, first, initially when President Jammeh said that those behind the coup plot were American citizens and UK citizens, it sounded almost like he was just trying to confuse everybody. Were you surprised that American citizens have been arrested and charged here in the US?
Yes, certainly. Everybody is kind of surprised that these individuals were named as those involved in the attack. However, being citizens of the Gambia as well, they have interest in the Gambia, they have families in the Gambia, and for them to have participated, even though no one knew about these people, it's not from that angle surprising. What would have surprised us is American citizens who have no ties to Gambia. But the fact that they have ties to Gambia comes as no surprise at all.
Yeah, but you're one person who in the past also has been detained on certain charges by the government of the Gambia. But at the same time here, the U.S. is saying there is an act which says that a U.S. citizen shall not participate in such acts. Now, how do you deal with this when you have dual citizenship?
In my case, I'm sure the United States did not at the time have any evidence connecting me with a coup attempt in the Gambia, whereas in this case, it's quite possible. I'm sure the U.S. must have had some evidence showing that there has been a violation of this law, which is probably why the U.S. acted so quickly. That's the only explanation I can come up with on that question.
Yeah. Now, tell me, what do you think is the best approach to changes in the Gambia for those who are in the diaspora and are really, really interested in having a kind of a democratic and peaceful country there?
I think the first thing that we need to do is to get assistance from the international community because, quite frankly, Mr. Jammeh does not entertain any form of opposition. And as such, there is absolutely no way Gambians who wish to participate in the political process but happen to be on the other side of the political divide can freely do so. And they are left with looking for other ways and means in which to bring about a change that may be unconstitutional. In this case, we quite understand that the United States has an obligation to enforce its laws, and we welcome that very much indeed. But we would also like to appeal to the United States to look at the totality of the circumstances under which these things happen and understand that these individuals are law-abiding citizens. They meant well for the Gambia. They have been living in the United States for so long and have become very useful citizens, and that it is the political frustration at home that drove them to this point. Like we said, the U.S. can go ahead and enforce its laws, and we support that, but we also like them to look at the totality of the circumstances and in some way show some kind of mercy to these people.
Now, those who seem a little concerned with what appears to be the U.S. saying, this is a country we are at peace with, by extension, is our friend. How do you feel about that?
Yes, I mean, there's one thing we need to understand, that we Gambians in the diaspora, dissidents, may dislike and disrespect President Jammeh as much as they want. However, that does not change the relationship in which the United States has with the Gambia. The United States has its own national interest. It has its own way of looking at things and working at things. And there is just a certain point to which dissidents in the diaspora can influence that. I think right now the best thing to do is for everybody, including the Gambia government, to stop any form of violence towards any Gambian citizen, and let's try to create an environment in which we can all sit down and talk. We cannot support people coming from other nations with arms into the Gambia to overthrow the government. At the same time, we cannot support the government to keep violating the fundamental rights of the Gambians in the country.
Well, Mr. Jasseh, thank you very much for joining us today. Tamsir Jasseh of the Gambian Association of Peace and Reconciliation. Well, such has pulled the bodies of two more Air Asia crash victims from the Java Sea on Tuesday, with diving teams making slow progress in an unfavorable weather. The remains of 39 of the 162 people aboard Flight 8501 have been recovered after 10 days of searching for wreckage off the coast of Borneo. Meanwhile, the U.S. military sent a second ship to the area to aid in the search with its special sonar devices. VOA's Caroline Presutti shows us how the search equipment is being used.
This is Towfish. It is a side-scan sonar device that is combing the ocean floor of the Java Sea, searching for pieces of AirAsia Flight 8501. Daniel Clark is a U.S. Navy diver who works with Towfish.
We can find things as small as a golf ball, or of course something as big as an airplane, using different kilohertz bands and our swaths.
Towfish is attached to the USS Fort Worth by 91 meters of cable. What it sees appears in real time on a computer aboard the ship.
Exactly.
Indonesian officials reported 5 large objects in the water as shallow as 30 meters, but the currents were too strong for divers, so Towfish was called in. It can be dragged by the U.S. Navy ship at speeds up to 5.7 knots.
The faster we go, the less clear the resolution we're going to have. The slower we go, the more clear it's going to be.
Poor resolution results in shadows like these. Clark says they will first deploy it quickly to find larger objects, then more deliberately for detail. Another U.S. Navy ship has been in the area. It helped with the recovery of 30 bodies from the crash. The AirAsia 2-hour flight was halfway between Surabaya, Indonesia, and Singapore when it hit heavy monsoons. The pilot's request to fly at a higher altitude above the storms was not approved because of other planes in the area. Indonesian weather officials say the storms could have caused icing, which may have downed the plane. But no definite cause will be known until pinging like this is heard. And investigators can study the data and cockpit recorders of the black box. Caroline Presutti, VOA News, Washington.
As U.S. lawmakers return to Washington for the brand new 114th Congress, Republicans will likely exert greater influence after winning control of the U.S. Senate and boosting their majority in the House of Representatives. Cindy Sain looks at what this will mean for President Barack Obama and for Washington's ability to deal with pressing issues such as immigration and economic inequality.
After a Christmas vacation with his family in Hawaii, President Obama returned to Washington to face a stark new political reality. Incoming Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell told CNN's State of the Union that the Senate will vote on a lot of things the president is not going to like, such as a proposed oil pipeline and energy deregulation. McConnell said the balance of power has shifted.
Now he needs to talk to us, and that's good, because when the American people elect divided government, they're not saying they don't want anything done. What they are saying is they want things done in the political center.
One of the new Republican members of Congress, Mia Love, says lawmakers need to pay more attention to voters.
You know, we have
face dysfunction, because people on both sides of the aisle have said, you know, we want Americans to trust us again, and we've got that backwards. We have to trust the American people again.
On the Democratic side of the aisle, Senator Elizabeth Warren strongly disagrees with the Republican agenda, saying Congress needs to focus on the nation's disadvantaged.
Washington already works really well for the billionaires and the big corporations and the lawyers and the lobbyists. But what about the families who lost their homes or their jobs or their retirement savings the last time Citi bet big on derivatives and lost? We were sent here to fight for those families, and it is past time for Washington to start working for them.
Analyst Stuart Rothenberg says Warren represents a growing populist wing within the Democratic Party.
The populist, anti-establishment, Democratic progressive left is developing. Supporters of Senator Elizabeth Warren, Mayor de Blasio from New York, the movement that wants to talk more about equality and fairness, $15, $20 minimum wage. That is a growing force within the Democratic Party.
But on issues such as immigration, Rothenberg says Republicans are more divided than Democrats.
So in that regard, the Republicans are more divided. The Republicans are more intimidated at the moment by their most ideological wing, the Tea Party folks. And so they probably have somewhat more blame for the paralysis.
As expert crews work on restoring the beautiful dome on the outside of the U.S. Capitol, some analysts say lawmakers on the inside also have plenty of work to do to restore trust and find common ground. Cindy Sain, VOA News on Capitol Hill.
Well, in Cuba, several activists were detained last week. Cuban dissidents now say the detentions demonstrate that U.S. President Barack Obama's recent decision to re-establish diplomatic relations with the communist nation was a mistake. However, the Obama administration maintains its new policy will eventually help bring change to Cuba. VOA's Bill Rogers reports.
Cuba's ladies in white are demanding the release of political prisoners and improved human rights. But they don't believe President Obama's opening to Havana will bring freedom, says leader Berta Soler.
Obama thought this would favor the Cuban people, but that's not the case. Everything that comes out of this renewal of ties will benefit the Cuban government and not the Cuban people.
Dissidents say the arrest of Cuban performance artist Tania Bruguera last week is an example of the continuing repression. Bruguera and some 50 others were detained for planning an event in Havana's Revolution Square to push for freedom of expression. Authorities later released her and some of the other activists. Washington condemned the detentions, but State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki was pressed Monday to defend the new U.S. policy.
One of the reasons why we move forward with the change in policy is because we want to empower Cuban citizens to give them greater ability to promote positive change going forward. And a critical focus of our announced actions include continued strong focus on improved human rights conditions, of which we know that the situation in Cuba remains poor.
Yet she acknowledged to reporters there's still no word on the release of 53 Cuban political prisoners Havana promised would be freed following President Obama's announcement normalizing relations. Critics of the opening include prominent U.S. lawmakers of both parties who say President Obama got little in return from Havana in exchange for easing parts of the decades-long economic embargo, including allowing U.S. telecommunications investments. An editorial in the Washington Post newspaper pointed to Bruguera's detention as evidence the president should have demanded protections for pro-democracy activists in return for his overture. But it is in Cuba where dissidents, such as Elisardo Sanchez, feel most discouraged.
We don't see any sign that the government is willing to make the reforms the country needs. So everything will continue more or less the same as it has been in previous years.
January 1st marked 56 years since Fidel Castro swept into power and launched the Cuban Revolution. Today, ordinary Cubans are waiting to see if the new U.S. policy will have any impact on their daily lives or on the Caribbean islands' communist government. Bill Rogers, VOA News, Washington.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, the health challenges and setbacks of 2014. Stay with us.
Ebola is not a curse or spiritual infection. It is a deadly disease, a fever spread by contact with the body fluids of infected people. I am Dr. Conde Greaves. Its symptoms start with a fever, fatigue, and muscle pain. Within a few days, vomiting and diarrhea sets in, and victims lose about 4 liters of body fluid each day. Ebola is highly infectious. If you experience any of these symptoms, seek medical help immediately. You must wash your hands regularly. Do not eat or handle bushmeat. Stay away from people suffering from Ebola. And do not handle the bodies of Ebola victims. If you have had contact with someone who has Ebola, you need to have your temperature monitored daily for any change. Early diagnosis and treatment is critical to your survival. Learn the facts about Ebola. Knowledge is life.
Welcome back. Now, the West Africa Ebola epidemic dominated health news in 2014, but there were advances in treating other deadly viruses. VOA's Carol Pearson reports that still other diseases, those treated with antibiotics, suffered a major setback.
Throughout 2014, health workers worked despite fatigue to care for Ebola patients in West Africa, while scientists and researchers fast-tracked treatments and anti-Ebola vaccines. Some are already in clinical trials, others will be in early 2015. Although the number of new infections is slowing, until that number gets to 0, the disease could come raging back. In April, the World Health Organization warned that we were entering a post-antibiotic era, where there are no longer effective treatments for common but serious bacterial diseases. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says this results in 23,000 deaths in the U.S. alone. Dr. Trish Pearl is an epidemiologist at Johns Hopkins Medicine.
You all of a sudden understand what it was like to practice medicine maybe 50, 70, 80 years ago when there weren't antibiotics.
The World Health Organization is urging doctors to build a data pool of which antibiotics kill which strains of bacteria and to avoid prescribing antibiotics that aren't going to work. Progress in fighting malaria was a highlight in 2014. Since 2000, the WHO reports the number of cases has dropped by 47%. Dr. Pedro Alonso directs the WHO malaria program.
We are making steady progress. In fact, I would actually call it unprecedented progress in the fight against malaria.
The results were largely because people at risk for malaria had bed nets treated with insecticide, along with testing and treatment. Dr. Alonso estimates that more than 4 million lives were saved, good news especially for children, who account for malaria's greatest number of victims. But as always, there's more work to be done. There was also promising research in developing a vaccine to combat dengue, another disease caused by a parasite that's transmitted by a mosquito. dengue is 30 times more prevalent now than it was 50 years ago, according to the WHO. In July, the French pharmaceutical company Sanofi Pasteur announced that its trials in Asian countries will enable it to develop a vaccine. There are 4 strains of dengue, and a vaccine that might work on one strain may not work on others. But British scientists have discovered molecules, specifically antibodies, in human blood that stop all forms of dengue. The scientists say the molecules offer a roadmap for developing a simple vaccine that could be effective for all strains of the virus. Carol Pearson, VOA News.
Well, security breaches at Sony and other major companies have raised questions about the safety of corporate and consumer data. The biggest risk for consumers remain fraud and theft. As Michael Sullivan reports, corporations now face a higher level of threat than they once did.
On Christmas Day, Sony's PlayStation network was targeted by hackers. The company had just experienced a massive data breach 1 month earlier, when hackers released troves of corporate data to the public. The infiltrators were unhappy with the Sony film The Interview, which made fun of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. U.S. authorities believe North Korea was behind the attack. North Korea has denied it. Others say that private hackers must have been involved. Whoever was responsible, the data breach created a crisis for Sony. In September, Home Depot revealed a 5-month-long attack on its payment terminals that led to stolen data on tens of millions of its customers. An earlier breach was aimed at customers of Target stores. Each security breach is different, but analyst Hugh Thompson of the security firm Blue Coat says the attacks are targeted and the attackers are persistent, and that off-site hackers often focus on specific employees.
People like system administrators, and then going online to social media and finding out what their favorite restaurant is, what their favorite sports team is, and then crafting an email that looks so painfully normal that you really think that it is from a friend or is from a colleague.
The recipient is tricked into clicking on a link and downloading a virus. Security firms like Blue Coat and Cyfort work with major companies to prevent and identify cyber attacks. But Cyfort co-founder Fengmin Gong says that today some hackers belong to complex organizations and they're patient.
So they can get hold of a lot of toolkits. A lot of attack techniques and solutions get packaged, so they're easily available to them.
He says they are part of an industrial-scale hacking economy. Online commerce is estimated at $1.5 trillion, and security breaches have many consumers worried. Internet sites like PayPal aim to help buyers do their online shopping safely. PayPal's Andy Steingrubel spoke with VOA via Skype.
Because of the work I do, I'm actually kind of an optimist on a lot of this about how well at least some companies are doing in upping their game, in developing better next generation defenses, and the way technology and innovation are leading the way on keeping companies and their customers safer.
PayPal works with so-called ethical hackers to find flaws in the system, and late last year, the company paid an Egyptian engineer $10,000 for reporting vulnerabilities. These experts say consumers can protect themselves by updating security software, keeping passwords safe, and guarding personal data, but that businesses need to double their efforts against an escalating threat from sophisticated hackers. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News, Los Angeles.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. Well, a real housewife starts off the year in prison gap. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines.
In Ghana, the outgoing chief of the UN's anti-Ebola mission is hopeful that the Ebola outbreak can end in 2015. And the Senegalese government is preparing to deport a Gambian dissident, Cheikh Sidiya Bayo, after last week's failed coup attempt. In the UK, French entrepreneur Jean Veribable says his app saves lives by providing an easy and affordable way to detect malaria. Finally, in Equatorial Guinea, the government says that the stadiums will be ready for AFCON, the African Cup of Nations, which starts on January 17th. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. One of New Jazz's reality TV stars is ringing in the new year as a prison inmate. Teresa Giudice, a cast of the Bravo's Real Housewives of New Jersey, reported to a federal prison in Danbury, Connecticut on Monday to begin serving a 15-month sentence for bankruptcy fraud. She and her husband, Joe Giudice, pleaded guilty last year and admitted hiding assets from bankruptcy creditors and submitting phony loan applications to get some $5 million in mortgages and construction loans. Joe also pleaded guilty to failing to pay taxes, totaling more than $200,000. Well, next up, after a whirlwind romance, actress Cameron Diaz and rock musician Benji Madden are married. The couple married in their Los Angeles home on Monday, according to People magazine. Diaz and Madden had been dating since May and got engaged shortly before Christmas, according to the magazine. Diaz, a Golden Globe-nominated actress, most recently starred in the film Annie, reworking of the Tony-winning 1977 Broadway musical of the same name. Madden is best known for performing in the rock bands Good Charlotte and the Madden Brothers with his twin brother Joel Madden. And finally, is Bono broken? Well, the U2 frontman and activist has written in a blog post on the band's website that he may never play guitar again. Bono had a bicycle accident in New York last November that left him with multiple injuries, including fractures in his shoulder blade, left elbow, and left eye socket. The 54-year-old singer was trying to avoid another cyclist when the accident occurred, and that is what is trending today. Well, and that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us in Washington, have a good night. We are able to touch on things that are important to people on an everyday basis. Hello and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. In a lively half hour, news, sports, health, lifestyle information, comments from our viewers. Africa 54, the best for Africa, about Africa. Join us only on VOA.
Happy New Year from VOA.
VOA. Happy New Year from VOA.
VOA की जानिब से नया साल मुबारक.
अमेरिका में सेसनमैन मुतली यल्ला.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year from VOA.
Happy New Year. From all of us here at VOA.